tonight, the end of Title 42.
I want to be very clear. Our borders are not open.
The new warning from the White House for migrants as Border Patrol reports near-record encounters. Plus, the House always wins. A plan to let Texans vote on legalizing online sports betting narrowly advances in the legislature. And later, demanding gun safety reform.
Had that law been in place in Uvalde, Texas, I do not think Uvalde would have happened.
Why one big city Republican mayor is urging the rest of her party to raise the age limit to buy semi-automatic weapons. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. In just hours, the pandemic-era policy known as Title 42 will expire after 3 years. It's expected to significantly alter several years of U.S. immigration policy, threatening chaos as an estimated tens of thousands of migrants gather near the U.S.-Mexico border in anticipation. This is a live look of the border in El Paso right now. Earlier today, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas issued another warning to asylum seekers.
If anyone arrives at our southern border after midnight tonight, they will be presumed ineligible for asylum and subject to steeper consequences for unlawful entry, including...
The White House is also continuing to encourage migrants to apply for asylum online and announced an increase in appointments through the CBP One app. Taylor Popolars is in Washington with how the Biden administration plans to handle the surge.
At least 4,000 National Guard troops are now posted along the southern border to help handle an expected surge in attempted illegal crossings as a pandemic restriction known as Title 42 ends. On Thursday, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas warned migrants about new policies the Biden administration enacted to deter them from taking advantage of Title 42's demise. Those policies expanded legal pathways for entry while imposing new penalties for illegal crossings.
We are clear-eyed about the challenges we are likely to face in the days and weeks ahead, and we are ready to meet them.
Under Title 42, people trying to enter illegally would be turned away almost immediately. President Joe Biden has acknowledged the southern border could be, quote, chaotic for a while once the rule is lifted. There were 10,000 illegal crossings alone on Wednesday, an increase over previous days.
I think presidents of both parties have failed, I think. So far, Biden has, Trump did, Obama did, Bush did. It's clear that we as a country are not prepared enough. So that's why I want to extend Title 42.
Although lawmakers in both parties admit the immigration and asylum system is broken and want reforms, there is currently no proposal that has a legitimate chance of getting through this divided Congress. In Washington, Taylor Popolars, Capitol Tonight.
But that didn't stop Republicans in the U.S. House from pushing through their sweeping immigration reform proposal today. Texas GOP members joined their colleagues in passing a bill that would severely restrict asylum and resume construction of a border wall. Irina Diamante reports from Washington.
For Texas Republicans, the surge of migrants into border cities like El Paso or Brownsville is evidence President Joe Biden's immigration policies aren't working.
Wanting to come to America has always been there, right? We're the greatest country in the world. But Biden has let this happen, and Mayorkas has let this happen, and they won't admit it.
What Texas Democrats call the sweeping reform legislation House Republicans passed Thursday inhumane.
The bill is passed.
As well as a missed opportunity to fix a broken immigration system and help the economy at the same time.
What they claim is a crisis, I see as an opportunity. If every American who's reported as unemployed today were to take a job, we would still have millions of unfilled jobs. We have people that could be doing construction work, caring for the old and the young.
The bill, called the Secure the Border Act, would restrict asylum, resume construction of President Donald Trump's border wall, and boost the number of Border Patrol officers. Despite some agreements earlier this year, all House Republicans from Texas joined their GOP colleagues in voting for the bill, which was passed hours before pandemic border restrictions were to end late Thursday night. The end of those restrictions is expected to create a new surge of migrants seeking asylum in the U.S.
That surge is happening, and I'm going to feel that in the district. My people are going to feel that. So again, moving legislation in this bill, in H.R. 2, is again, it's inertia. We have to apply the pressure. Now it goes to the Senate, What's it going to come back looking like? I can't tell you.
One House Democrat from Texas says immigration reform is needed, but the Republican bill is the wrong approach. He says he's concerned it would restrict legal pathways for asylum seekers, including Afghan refugees.
The immigration system, even the asylum system, is broken in the United States. And people, whether they're Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, I think agree with that. I don't think anybody looks at the system right now and says that it's perfect or that it's working well.
Republicans have made conditions at the border a major issue, and by passing the Secure the Border Act, they can say they made good on a top campaign promise. But with President Joe Biden and Senate Democrats opposing the measure, it has little chance of becoming law. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
Turning now to the Texas legislature, where it's a critical deadline day in the House. Lawmakers there have until midnight to give an initial okay to their bills or their likely debt. Many at the bottom of the list relate to firearm safety, health care, and elections. Our Charlotte Scott joins us now live from the state capitol. And Charlotte, at least one vote today so far has been quite dramatic. Took a real gamble on a bill, right?
Yes, Karina. Lawmakers today rolled the dice on a bill that would legalize online sports betting. It needed 100 votes to pass, and it got 101. That's because it would make a change to the state constitution.
Representatives are racing against the clock as they try to pass their House bills before a midnight deadline.
Land-grant voting aye.
One that crossed the finish line would let voters decide whether to legalize mobile sports betting in Texas.
This bill makes our unsafe and illegal market legal and safe.
The bill's author, Plano Area Representative Jeff Leach, postponed it in the morning when he didn't have enough votes to get it passed.
We have time to get it right. I'm not a no, I'm a not now.
But with bipartisan support.
This bill will provide records amounts of funding that will transform professional women's sporting opportunities.
The House approved the measure. Cheers erupted in the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, appreciate your support.
Members took a bet on this bill, but they'll need to pull an inside straight to see victory in the Senate.
Lawmakers in the House are also expected later to vote on an expanded gambling measure. It would allow voters in Texas to decide if they want casinos in the state. But Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who leads the Senate, says neither bill have the votes to pass the Senate. And he, in the past, has said that he does not support expanded gambling measures. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Charlotte, thank you. And joining us now live is former Governor Rick Perry, who's been pushing for the regulation of online sports betting in Texas. Governor, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you very much.
A real squeaker to get this passed today with 101 votes that it needed to kind of get over the finish line there in the House. I mean, were you surprised that it did get this far?
No, I'm very convinced that the people of the state of Texas would like to have the opportunity to vote on whether or not they would like to see the regulation of sports betting. And just to be clear, this is not an expansion of gambling. I hear the word expansion of gambling pitched out. This is something that's going on. It's been going on. There's $6.5 billion worth of bets that people make on mobile devices every year in the state of Texas. Need to make sure it's safe, make sure that those platforms are not nefarious, they're not offshore, and that people are protected, their personal information. That's exactly what this bill does. Yeah. I think there's probably 75% of the people in the state of Texas that believe, you know what, we were smart enough to elect you to go to the legislature. I think you ought to trust us to decide whether or not this piece of legislation that's now a constitutional amendment should be passed, and we're pretty capable of doing that. So I think it was wise for the members to say, you know what, I'm going to let the people of the state of Texas decide this. This is in their hands now. Well, it's in the Senate's hand now. And I think senators agree that that is what needs to happen, is the people need to decide this issue.
Well, Governor, I mean, you're friends with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. At least he says that the two of you are friends. He's been pushing back against these issues for a long time. So how do you get him on board?
Well, listen, an incredibly wise and capable man. But he understands that he's sent here to work for the people of the state of Texas, and that this isn't an issue about whether or not it's expansion of gambling. It's not. And I would argue that with anyone. It's something that's going on now, and it's going to continue to go on. Let's just make sure it's safe. But I do know the Lieutenant Governor respects the people of this state highly. They've elected him to one of the highest offices in the state, and I think he trusts them to make the decisions on this issue. And I'm not going to speak for him, but my bet is that the senators will take a look at this, and they will make a decision that the people of the state of Texas deserve to be able to make a vote on whether or not they want to see the sports betting industry regulated in this state, to make sure that their personal information is safe and that there are no nefarious players out there on these platforms.
I know you've talked about the revenue that this could generate as well. What if it doesn't pass? I mean, you're talking about the regulation and people that are doing this illegally already. What if this doesn't pass? What continues to happen in this state?
Well, Texas doesn't get any of that money, and more importantly, I will suggest to you, or just as important, let me put it that way, the personal information. People are not going to stop going and putting a wager on a sporting event, just like they're not going to go stop putting a wager on a stock. I tell people, I said, tell me the difference between taking your phone and betting on a company's stock going up and taking your phone and betting on whether or not a particular team is going to win a game. There's probably about as much time and effort spent on either side of that for companies, looking at companies and deciding, what their decisions are, whether they're going to be profitable or not, or looking at a sports team who's been injured, who's playing who. I mean, I look at these two as exactly the same. In 1929, we had a crash and we regulated the stock market. I think we need to regulate the sports betting business now.
Governor, I'm going to have to let you go, but yes or no, do you support a measure that they're going to take up later on to allow casinos in Texas?
Well, again, I'll leave that to the people of the state of Texas.
Sure.
People know that during my period of time, I was not for expansion of gambling.
Right.
But that was then, this is now, and sports betting is not an expansion of gambling. That's the real issue.
Thank you, Governor. We appreciate your time. Take care.
Welcome.
Still to come on Capitol tonight, a last-ditch effort to pass a raise the age gun bill, and a big city Republican mayor joins us to discuss her support for it. Welcome back. This week, gun control advocates got a short-lived win. A House committee advanced a bill that would raise the age from 18 to 21 to buy AR-15 style rifles. But despite pleas to move it forward, the legislation missed a key deadline about 2 days later. Attempts to add it to other bills during today's deadline day in the House have so far failed as well. The Raise the Age bill was the main proposal families of the victims of the Uvalde school shooting pushed this session. After the latest mass shooting in Allen, they even gained some Republican support, both in the legislature and among at least one local elected official who renewed her calls to pass the bill. And she joins us now, Fort Worth Mayor Maddie Parker. Mayor Parker, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You put out a statement noting your support for this bill, and I know we were talking, and this isn't new for you, but why did you feel the need to voice support for this again?
Well, I think first of all, this country is desperately in need of common sense policies. I know I feel like that as a Texan and as a mother, as a policymaker, as a mayor. After the tragedy in Uvalde, I joined my other big city mayors across Texas in advocating for a few different policy changes, one of which was this age increase from 18 to 21 for semi-automatic weapons like an AR-15, which just simply would create parity of how we treat 21-year-olds in the state. You can't buy alcohol and you can't buy tobacco until you're 21, but you can walk in and buy an AR-15. And I just don't think it makes sense. And additionally, I really feel strongly that those of us that do support Second Amendment rights, in order to protect the Second Amendment, you need common sense policies.
Yeah, I mean, the reluctance from the Republican-led legislature, we've seen this for decades now, really, when it comes to any kind of gun restrictions. I mean, what's your reaction to the focus always being on mental health and not any gun control measures?
I think the answer to this crisis is going to have to take everything. I fully support all of the changes they're making and investments in specifically in mental health, because we do know we have a mental health crisis. I talked about this after Uvalde. It's also cultural in this country that we're facing when someone will turn to that level of violence. How are we not noticing these people in the first place? Where are they finding these types of exposure opportunities, whether it's in social media and the media in general? We need the long-term investment strategies, especially investments in mental health, but we also desperately need short-term solutions. And I fully believe that moving the age limit from 18 to 21, had that law been in place in Uvalde, Texas, I do not think Uvalde would have happened, which is why you've seen those parents come day after day to the state capitol begging for a policy change. And I push back. I don't think this is a gun control bill. I think, again, it's common sense policy shift. It mirrors other Republican states like the state of Florida, where it is 21 to purchase any type of firearm. And I know in Texas that when I talk to colleagues across the state, including Republicans, there is support for this specific change. And I still remain hopeful that while it may not happen this session, we can create a policy push in this state that is desperately needed.
Yeah, we just have about a minute left, but I mean, speaking to that, and with the two Republican lawmakers who you mentioned who supported this and helped advance it out of committee, I mean, what do you think that signals for gaining any more traction? I mean, we know that it often takes years for some of this legislation to really get the support that it needs to pass.
I think, unfortunately, because these shootings are becoming more and more commonplace and it's hitting closer and closer to home. This last weekend, Allen was a good example of that crisis happening here in North Texas. So that's one. Number two is you have to give credit to Representative Harless and Holland, who voted to advance this bill. They heard a tremendous amount of testimony and have been living this reality in the legislature this session and felt really strongly that this was a common sense policy they were willing to advance. And I think it does signal that you can still be a proponent for Second Amendment rights, a gun owner yourselves, and also support changes like this that are very incremental and small. And furthermore, a lot of people are just misinformed on what the bill does. It's not stripping anybody's rights from weapons. You can still purchase different types of firearms. There are still exclusions for those that are honorably discharged from the military or law enforcement officers. So I push back on that heavily.
Yeah.
The reality is this is a change that needs to happen in this state. It will save lives, and it takes nothing away from our efforts in mental health. It's just the reality we're facing in this country, and we need to be better.
Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker, thank you so much for your time.
Thank y'all for having me.
Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across the state. Hundreds of students across the state walked out of school today to protest gun violence. It was in response to the latest mass shooting at a mall in Allen, Texas. They're calling for lawmakers to take action on implementing gun restrictions. Texas is busing more migrants to Washington, D.C. as Title 42 is set to end. Governor Abbott's office said one bus dropped off about 50 migrants at Vice President Kamala Harris's residence Wednesday night, and another 30 migrants arrived this morning. Governor Abbott launched the controversial program last April, sending thousands of migrants to Democratic-led cities. The governor signed a bill to make Stephen F. Austin University a member of the University of Texas system. The East Texas School is currently independently operated and controlled by its own board. Tenured faculty will still be entitled to tenure, and students will maintain their enrollment. Still to come on Capitol tonight, after more than 3 years, the country's COVID-19 public health emergency declaration expires today. What that means for the fight against the virus. On January 31st, 2020, COVID-19 was declared a public health emergency in the U.S., but the Biden administration is not going to renew that declaration for a 14th time and will let it expire today. John Lawrence reports.
For more than 3 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected aspects of everyday life for people worldwide.
The United States got hit particularly hard by this pandemic. There's all sorts of reasons for that. But one of the big ones is that we were not very healthy going into this pandemic.
But the disease's grip on the globe is going away as the Biden White House is allowing the COVID public health emergency to expire Thursday. This comes as COVID-19 weekly cases and hospitalizations are down drastically from previous years.
I think for some people, this is going to seem very arbitrary and accelerated, that the emergency part of this pandemic is coming to an end. For other people, they're going to say, hey, look, months ago, maybe even a year ago, I was sort of through this.
While this is a milestone moment, health officials, including CNN's chief medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta, say COVID-19 was still responsible for around 1,100 weekly deaths in the U.S. at the end of last month.
That's about 55,000 a year that would die if those numbers stayed the same, which is basically a really bad flu season. We could do better, but that's where we are right now.
But Gupta says the U.S., and the world for that matter, has tools to fight the virus.
There's no reason anyone should die of this disease anymore. We have the technology to prevent that from happening.
I'm John Lawrence reporting.
The meeting between President Joe Biden and congressional leaders on the debt ceiling has been postponed. It was set for Friday, but now delayed as talks continue. They all met on Tuesday, but made no movement on a solution. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warns if leaders do not come up with a solution, the government could run out of money by June. Former President Donald Trump is appealing the $5 million judgment awarded to writer E. Jean Carroll in a civil lawsuit. This after a federal jury in Manhattan found Trump liable for sexually abusing and defaming Carroll. Trump's lawyers filed a notice of appeal today, just hours after a federal judge endorsed the verdict. Carroll alleged Trump raped her in a New York department store in 1996. She says he then defamed her when he denied her claim and accused her of making the story up to boost sales of her book. The former president denies the attack ever happened. And that is going to do it for this edition of Capitol Tonight. We are back tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.